Ohio doesn't seem dangerous to your imagination. A quiet, flat state, no deserts, no towering mountains, no loud legends. Yet that very ordinariness hides a series of hard-to-believe paradoxes. A war so noisy it required federal government intervention but saw almost no shots fired. A state that produced so many astronauts it's joked that everyone there wants to leave Earth. The only state flag in America that isn't rectangular. And even a street so short you can cross it in just a few steps. Sounds made up? Not at all. Every one of these has a name, a location, and a clear point in time. Ohio doesn't try to be strange, it just happens to be exceptionally good at it. And the real question is, do you dare believe that the following 15 things are all true, even though each one sounds like a joke? Fact number 1. The Cuyahoga River on fire. Imagine standing on a bridge in Cleveland looking down at the Cuyahoga River as it slowly winds past old factories. A light wind blows, the dark surface reflecting a gray sky, and then flames erupt. Not on the shore, not inside a factory, but right on the surface of the water. It sounds like a scene from science fiction, but in Ohio, it was once reality. The Cuyahoga River became a national symbol of something that seemed impossible, a river that could catch fire. Throughout the 20th century, oil, chemicals, and industrial waste were dumped directly into the river, turning its surface into something closer to an oil slick than a natural waterway. All it took was a single spark, from a train, machinery, or a cigarette butt, and boom, the water burned like gasoline. The tipping point came on June 22, 1969. This fire was not the largest, not the longest lasting, and there isn't even a photograph capturing the moment the flames rose. But it was the fire that happened at exactly the right time. National media took notice. Time magazine described the Cuyahoga as a river that oozes rather than flows, where fish could not survive and the water itself could burn. America was stunned. One question echoed across the country: how did we allow this to happen? The irony is that the 1969 fire was not the first. Before that, the Cuyahoga had burned more than a dozen times, dating back to 1868. But in an industrial city, people had grown used to it. Fire? Well, it burns. As if the river had been accepted as just another part of the industrial machine, no longer nature at all. And that very sense of normalization was what made it truly terrifying. The Cuyahoga became the final spark, quite literally, that ignited the modern environmental movement in the United States. Just a few years later, the Clean Water Act was passed. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, was created. Cities were forced to re-examine the relationship between development and destruction. One burning river awakened an entire nation. Today, the Cuyahoga looks completely different. The water is clearer. Fish have returned. Kayaks glide quietly over what was once a sea of oil. Riverside parks are filled with people jogging, walking dogs, and watching the sunset. If no one told you the story, you would never believe that this gentle river was once the most infamous river of fire in America. If this story sounds hard to believe, hit like, because this is only the beginning. Up next, water in Ohio won't just burn, it will create its own weather. Fact number 2. Lake Erie, the snowmaking machine. Along the northeastern shore of Ohio, where the city of Cleveland nestles beside the vast lake, there exists a phenomenon that renders weather forecast maps almost helpless. Lake Erie is not just a freshwater lake. In winter, it operates like a massive snow spraying machine. When cold air pours down from Canada and sweeps across the lake's still warm surface, Lake Erie pulls moisture up into the atmosphere. Within just a few hours, snow clouds form, are driven straight inland by the wind, and then boom, snow falls violently, as if someone just flipped a switch. This phenomenon is called lake effect snow, and it makes Ohio's weather so strange it's hard to believe. There are nights when a town wakes up buried under waist-high snow, schools closed, cars entombed. Yet drive just a few miles farther, and you enter another neighborhood that is dry, lightly sunny, as if no storm had ever passed through. The snow falls in narrow, precise, selective bands, as though Lake Erie were deliberately aiming. The reason lies here. Erie is the shallowest of the Great Lakes. It warms quickly in summer and retains heat well into early winter. When a cold air mass sweeps over it, the temperature contrast creates extremely powerful moisture conveyor belts. Wind direction decides everything. Shift it by just a few degrees, and the town chosen to take the full hit of snow instantly changes. And if you think that after a burning river and a snow-making lake, Ohio has run out of its strange tricks, don't leave just yet. Because right after this frozen landscape, Ohio will take you to a place you would never expect to see here. Hot sand, dry prairie, and cactus growing in the heart of America. Fact number 3. When cactus bloom on the sands of Ohio, leaving behind the ice and snow of Lake Erie, Ohio does not cool down in the way you might expect. Just drive northwest near Toledo, and the landscape begins to change its tone. The ground grows drier, the sunlight harsher, and then, among pale yellow sand dunes, cactus appear. Not in flower pots, not as experimental plantings, but growing naturally, wild, right in the middle of Ohio. This area is called Oak Openings, a place that makes your brain slow down for a few seconds to process what it's seeing. It's often called Ohio's secret desert, where ancient sand dunes and dry prairie exist side by side with damp lowlands. On the scorching sand ridges, prickly pear cactus grow low to the ground, quietly bursting into bright yellow blooms in early summer. The scene looks as if it were lifted straight from Arizona and then dropped in the wrong place. What makes Oak Openings strange isn't just the cactus. It's the abrupt shift of scenery. Standing atop a dune, you can feel heat radiating from the ground, fine sand sinking beneath your shoes, scattered pine and scrub oak growing sparsely like a semi-desert landscape. But step down just a few dozen meters, and you reach moist soil, green grass, wild orchids, even patches of soggy ground. Ohio here places desert and wetland right next to each other, an arrangement that makes both biology and geography tilt their heads in disbelief. The story begins in the Ice Age. Thousands of years ago, a massive glacial lake covered this region. When the ice melted and the water receded, it left behind sandy shores of an ancient lakebed. Wind did the rest of the work, piling sand into hills, forming elevated sand plains that drain quickly and grow hot and dry in summer. This became the perfect environment for prickly pear cactus, the only cactus species native to Ohio, to thrive. Meanwhile, the low spots between the dunes retained water, forming wet prairies and dense oak forests. The result is a patchwork but vibrant ecological mosaic. Miniature desert, grassland, forest, and swamp all coexisting within a narrow space. It's no surprise that Oak Openings is often called Ohio's hidden paradise, home to more than 180 rare species, from the delicate Carner blue butterfly to purple lupine flowers blooming in late spring. For first-time visitors, the feeling is usually the same: confusion. Walking along the sand dunes trail, sand crunching underfoot, heat reflecting upward, spiny cactus shrubs peeking through, every sense insists you're somewhere in the American Southwest. But the signs, the maps, and reality all confirm the truth. You are still in Ohio. Before the hot sand has time to cool, the next story pulls us back into mud, thick mosquitoes, and a land that has vanished from the map. Fact number 4, the Great Black Swamp, the land that once swallowed Ohio. When you stand among the straight, orderly cornfields of northwestern Ohio today, it's hard to imagine that this place was once the greatest nightmare of the entire state. Not desert, not ice and snow, but a vast, dark swamp stretching from near Sandusky to the edge of the Indiana border, known to early settlers by a name that sent chills down the spine: the Great Black Swamp. At its peak, nearly 1/4 of Ohio was covered by this swamp. Spanning more than 4,000 square kilometers, it was so immense that many compared it to a northern Everglades. The soil was pitch black, tangled with roots, with bottomless mud. Mosquitoes were so dense that travelers claimed you could inhale them without even breathing. Wagons sank to their axles. Roads barely existed. The swamp didn't just block movement. It warped Ohio's entire settlement map. For thousands of years after the Ice Age, as retreating waters left behind flat land with nowhere to drain, the Great Black Swamp became a maze of mud and dense forest. Native peoples understood the land well and often avoided it. Europeans quickly learned the same lesson. Malaria spread relentlessly. Many migrant groups were forced to detour hundreds of kilometers simply to avoid stepping into this cursed terrain. Then the 19th century arrived with an idea so bold it bordered on reckless: erase the swamp entirely. Ohio decided to tame the monster. Thousands of kilometers of drainage ditches were dug, and ceramic drainage tiles, advanced technology for the time, were buried deep underground. Farmers built corduroy roads by laying logs side by side so wagons could cross the marsh. Meter by meter, the land was drained. Forest by forest, it was cut down. This transformation did not happen overnight. It took decades, paid for with sweat, disease, and even lives. And then the unimaginable happened. The water disappeared. What emerged beneath was some of the richest, most fertile black soil in the United States. Productive farmland spread, towns rose, railways extended. By the end of the 19th century, the Great Black Swamp had nearly vanished, not because nature changed, but because humans won. Today, driving through Henry, Wood, or Defiance counties, you'll see land so flat the horizon looks drawn with a ruler. Corn and soybean fields stretch endlessly. Narrow drainage ditches line the roads, quiet remnants of the ancient drainage system still at work. Few people realize that beneath this calm surface once lay a land that terrified an entire state. Only a handful of small nature preserves still hold memories of the old swamp. And only in hindsight do people recognize the cost. Massive drainage contributed to nutrient pollution and toxic algae blooms in Lake Erie today. The swamp is gone, but its consequences are not. The story of the Great Black Swamp is not just about nature, it is a reminder that Ohio didn't merely change its landscape, it rewrote the very way water moves across the map. And that leads us to another secret, subtler but no less strange. In Ohio, there are places where water doesn't know which way to flow. Fact number 5, the invisible boundary. Where a raindrop must choose its fate, running through Summit County near Akron, are stretches of road that look completely ordinary. No mountains, no cliffs. Yet right here, Ohio holds a rare geographic secret, an invisible boundary that splits the North American continent in two. Geographers call it the St. Lawrence Continental Divide. To nature, it is the place where water must make a decision. A raindrop that falls just north of this line will slip into small streams, join the Cuyahoga River, flow into Lake Erie, and then follow the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. But a raindrop that falls only a few steps to the south will drift into the Tuscarawas River, merge with the Ohio River, and be carried thousands of kilometers down to the Gulf of Mexico. Two drops of water born from the same cloud, yet ending their journeys in two different oceans. Near Portage Summit, there is a spot where you can perform a strange experiment. Pour water to the left, and it heads toward the North Atlantic. Pour it to the right, and it moves toward the American South. No large signs. No monument, just a subtle rise in the ground, a fragile yet powerful boundary. The reason lies in the terrain. Ohio isn't high, but it tilts with remarkable precision. A ridge runs diagonally from northeast to southwest, formed by glacial moraines left behind after the Ice Age. This ridge divides Ohio into two massive drainage basins, one belonging to the Great Lakes, the other to the Mississippi system. In many places, the only clue that you've crossed this divide is a small sign along the highway, sometimes labeled Watershed Divide, sometimes passed without anyone ever noticing. Ohio's history made full use of this subtle arrangement. Native peoples and European explorers used the area as a portage route, hauling boats over land to move from one river system to another. Akron grew up right on this roof, becoming an ideal location for the Ohio and Erie Canal, where boats were lifted by locks, carried across the divide, and then lowered again, as if humans were forcing water to travel against its natural destiny. Today, as you drive through Ohio, few people realize they have just crossed a geographic line of continental significance. Amid quiet cornfields, raindrops silently make their choices, unheard by anyone. No sound, no debate, just the moment when a flow begins to turn. Fact number 6. The Great Serpent Mound, leaving behind the boundary where raindrops must choose their fate, Ohio takes us to a place even quieter and more mysterious. In Peebles, southern Ohio, amid rolling green hills and silent forests, there lies a massive shape stretched across a hillside, unmoving, soundless, yet present for thousands of years. It is the Great Serpent Mound. At first glance from the ground, you might not notice anything unusual. Just a long earthen ridge, no higher than an adult's waist. But climb the observation tower or view it from above, and the truth is instantly revealed. A colossal serpent measuring 412 meters in length, its body flowing in 7 graceful curves, its tail coiled into a spiral and its head opened wide as if swallowing a round object. Some say an egg, others believe it represents the sun. What makes Serpent Mound unsettling is not its size, but its precision. The serpent is formed entirely of earth and stone, averaging 1 to 3 meters in height and about 6 meters in width. No machinery, no aerial maps. Yet its proportions are so exact that shifting it by just a few meters would collapse the entire composition. How could ancient people see the serpent from above when they had never flown into the sky? Archaeologists believe Serpent Mound was built by a prehistoric indigenous culture, possibly beginning around 300 BCE, the Adena culture, and later repaired or completed between the 11th and 13th centuries by the Fort Ancient culture. But the crucial question is not who built it, it is why they did. The answer began to emerge with a discovery that sent chills down researchers' spines. The serpent's head aligns perfectly with the sunset on the summer solstice. On that exact day, if you stand at the head of the mound, the sun appears to set directly into the mouth of the serpent, as if it is devouring the light. Other curves are believed to align with lunar cycles and the solstices and equinoxes throughout the year. Serpent Mound is not merely an earthwork, it is a massive astronomical calendar written into the landscape itself. Imagine the scene more than 1,000 years ago. A native community gathering on this hillside, watching the sun, the moon, the stars. Basket by basket, they carried earth and stone, patiently shaping a giant creature. Not to bury the dead, not to display power, but perhaps to connect the ground with the sky. Strikingly, no human remains or evidence of sacrifice have been found around the serpent, reinforcing the theory that this was a ceremonial site, not a burial mound like many others in Ohio. Today, walking along the serpent's body evokes a very different feeling. Not the grandeur of pyramids, not the coldness of stone ruins, but a quiet sense of reverence, as if you are walking across a question that history has yet to fully answer. From above, the serpent's form emerges clearly against the green grass, leaving many visitors whispering the same thought. How could they have done this? Fact number 7. The ancient meteorite impact crater. Standing atop the Serpent Mound, the feeling is often that human history is very close. But what few people realize is that the history of the entire planet is even closer, right beneath the ground, far below every step you take. Geologists refer to the area around Serpent Mound by a name that sends a chill down the spine, the Serpent Mound impact structure. It doesn't sound poetic, not mystical. But behind it lies a truth that forces the imagination to hesitate. Ohio was once struck by a meteorite. There is no obvious crater, no towering rocky rim like the one in Arizona, just gently rolling hills, lush green trees, and a landscape that looks completely harmless. Yet when scientists drilled deep into the ground in the 20th century, they began to notice something wrong. Rock layers were shattered, tilted, and crushed in chaotic ways, defying all the normal rules of geological folding. Beneath this peaceful surface lies a bowl-shaped structure with an estimated diameter of at least 8 kilometers, possibly up to 14 kilometers if the outer rim is included. It is the remnant of an impact that occurred roughly 250–300 million years ago, when a meteorite or comet several hundred meters wide slammed into southern Ohio at tremendous speed. The force of that collision was powerful enough to pierce the bedrock, generating shockwaves that shattered limestone and sandstone from the inside out. Over hundreds of millions of years, rain, wind, glaciers, and sediment flattened every visible trace on the surface. The crater disappeared. What remains is a cosmic scar hidden underground, readable only through modern science. The most critical evidence is shocked quartz, a mineral that forms only under extreme pressure, typically seen in nuclear explosions or meteorite impacts. When these crystals were discovered here, the debate largely ended. This was not a volcano, not slow tectonic movement, but a true blow from the sky. What makes the story even stranger is the near-perfect coincidence of location. Thousands of years after the impact, ancient indigenous peoples chose this very marked land to build the Serpent Mound. They could not have known about meteorites. They could not have measured geological structures. Yet some theories suggest that unusual terrain, strange magnetic properties, or a sense of the sacred drew them to this place. A massive earthen serpent guarding an ancient wound of the earth, the image is hard not to find unsettling. Even if it is only coincidence, it adds a profound layer of meaning. Where ancient people once looked to the sky to align the sun, the sky itself had once descended there with destructive force. Today, standing among Ohio's rolling green hills, there is no sign of what lies beneath. But knowing that below this gentle ground is rock crushed by a cosmic collision changes how Ohio feels. This state does not only preserve the memory of humanity, it preserves the memory of the earth itself. Fact number 8. The Put-in-Bay Crystal Cave. After the cosmic impact that shattered bedrock deep beneath Ohio, nature seems to have sought balance. No more violence, no more destruction. This time, the Earth chose to crystallize in silence. In the vast expanse of Lake Erie on the quiet South Bass Island, there is a place where you would never guess what lies below. Beneath the floor of a small family-owned winery hidden about 12 meters underground is a modest hollow space. Yet inside it rests one of Ohio's most dazzling secrets. This is Crystal Cave, often described as the largest geode in the world. While a typical geode fits in the palm of your hand, this one is large enough to walk into. The walls, ceiling, and ledges are completely coated in pale blue celestite crystals, some reaching nearly a meter across and weighing hundreds of kilograms. When light strikes them, the crystal faces shimmer as if light itself were trapped inside the stone. The discovery of Crystal Cave sounds almost like a fairy tale. In 1897, workers at Heinemann's winery were simply digging a well in search of water. One strike of the pick broke through limestone. Cold air rushed upward. When they climbed down to investigate, what appeared was not water, but a crystal chamber. No one was prepared for that moment. A small, sealed cave where the earth had quietly built a treasure over millions of years. Celestite, the mineral forming the cave, is strontium sulfate, commonly used in fireworks to create vivid colors. At first, many crystals were mined and sold for industrial use. But the Heinemann family soon realized that Crystal Cave's greatest value was not in extraction, but in being seen. Beginning in 1900, the cave was open to the public, and most of the crystals have been preserved to this day. Descending the narrow steps into the cave, the atmosphere instantly changes. Cool, silent, bathed in soft blue light. There are no long stalactites or frightening depths. Only crystal clusters jutting from the walls, the ceiling, the shadowed corners, as if the cave is still quietly growing, atom by atom. People often whisper when they enter, even though no one tells them to. Crystal Cave also played an unexpected role in local history. During Prohibition, when wineries around Lake Erie struggled to survive, it was this Crystal Cave that saved Heinemann's winery. Visitors came to see the crystals, drank grape juice, and unknowingly kept a family business alive. Once again, precious stone rescued people. Today, Crystal Cave is not large. You can walk through it in just a few minutes, but the feeling of standing among crystals millions of years old is hard to leave behind. It is a moment that makes you realize Ohio does not flaunt its wonders. It hides them beneath the ground, waiting for those curious enough to find them. Fact 9. Old Man's Cave. There are places you visit for the scenery. There are places you visit for the history. And then there are places you visit simply because the name is too intriguing to ignore. Old Man's Cave in Hocking Hills belongs to the third category. From the name alone, it conjures images of a deep, dark, mysterious cavern. But once again, Ohio plays a very subtle game. It lets you discover that your imagination was wrong. Because when you stand before Old Man's Cave, the first thing many people notice is this. There is no cave entrance, no tunnel cutting through a mountain, no darkness swallowing the light. Instead, there is a wide, open space, tucked beneath a naturally curved sandstone overhang, facing directly into a lush green gorge. In strict geological terms, this is simply a recess cave, a hollowed indentation in a rock face, not an enclosed cave as most people imagine. This rock shelter lies within the Blackhand Sandstone Formation, shaped as Old Man's Creek, patiently carved into the soft stone over thousands of years. The result is a narrow, deep gorge that stays cool year-round, where light and shadow constantly intertwine. Old Man's Cave is wide enough for dozens of people to rest inside, tall enough to inspire awe, and open enough that nature is always present. Wind, water, and sunlight all enter freely without permission. So why did a simple rock recess become one of Ohio's most famous landmarks? The answer lies with people, not geology. In the late 18th century, a man named Richard Rowe chose this spot as his place of solitude. He lived quietly with his dog, hunting, watching the forest, and staying away from society. When he died, according to legend, from a fall near the waterfall, he was buried right here. From that moment on, the nameless rock shelter gained an owner, and once a story existed, the name Old Man's Cave was born, never to disappear. What's fascinating is that even after discovering that Old Man's Cave isn't really a cave, visitors rarely feel deceived, because this place does not stand alone. It sits at the heart of a continuous landscape. Upper falls spilling from above into a deep green pool, stone steps guiding visitors through the cool rock recess, Devil's Bathtub swirling in stone like an unfinished geological experiment, and lower falls closing the journey with a deep, resonant rush of water. With every step, a new scene unfolds, and the question, is this really a cave, gradually becomes irrelevant. In winter, ice forms from the rock ceiling into shimmering columns. In summer, sunlight filters through the canopy, creating moving patterns of light and shadow. Old Man's Cave doesn't need darkness to feel mysterious. It has the power to captivate even when fully open before your eyes. And perhaps that is what Ohio does best. Not always creating things that fit strict definitions, but creating experiences that make definitions unnecessary. But if you think Ohioans only tell stories and name places, be ready to change your mind. Because next, we'll encounter something entirely different. Proof of what happens when humans refuse to accept the land as it is and decide to carve out a massive lake by hand. That place is Grand Lake St. Mary's. Fact number 10. Humans dug out an inland sea from a distance. Grand Lake St. Mary's looks like an ancient natural lake. Vast open water, wind-driven ripples, a horizon swallowed by water. But the truth makes most people pause for a moment to process it. The entire lake is artificial. And not just artificial, it was dug entirely by hand in the 19th century. When it was completed in 1845, Grand Lake St. Mary's covered about 13,500 acres, 55 km², making it the largest man-made lake in the world at the time. There were no heavy machines, no engines, no electricity, only shovels, picks, horse-drawn carts, and human labor. Around 1,700 workers, most of them German and Irish immigrants, worked continuously for 8 years. Their pay, 30 cents a day, plus a daily ration of whiskey to fight fatigue and keep warm. The reason Ohio undertook this seemingly insane project wasn't tourism, but transportation. In the early 19th century, the state was building the Miami-Erie Canal, connecting the Ohio River in Cincinnati to Lake Erie in Toledo. The problem was that the canal crossed the Continental Divide, where water does not naturally flow in. To keep boats moving, a massive feeder reservoir was required. A low-lying area between Salina and St. Mary's was chosen, and humans set out to create a sea. They dug channels, built embankments, blocked small streams, and gathered water bit by bit. When completed, the lake stretched nearly 14 kilometers long and about 5 kilometers wide, large enough that people of the era proudly called it the Grand Sea. And because it was created entirely by human effort, Grand Lake St. Mary's later earned the title of the largest hand-dug lake in the world, a distinction that is both impressive and hard to imagine. But the lake's story didn't end with the canal. In the late 19th century, oil was discovered beneath the lakebed. In 1891, the world's first offshore oil rigs appeared, right on the surface of Grand Lake. By 1915, more than 150 oil wells dotted the water. Alongside them flourished commercial fishing, winter ice harvesting, resorts, dance halls, and religious camps along the shore. Grand Lake was once one of the most vibrant centers in western Ohio. Time, of course, left its marks. Agricultural development around the lake led to nutrient runoff and toxic algae blooms, causing water quality to decline during many periods. Today, Ohio is investing heavily in restoration efforts. Even so, Grand Lake St. Mary's remains a state park with 52 miles of shoreline where people fish, boat camp, and watch the sunset. Fact number 11. The loudest war with no battles. After seeing that Ohioans could dig an entire inland sea using nothing but shovels and picks, you might think they must be pretty stubborn. And you'd be right. At one point in history, that stubbornness pushed Ohio and Michigan to the brink of war, over nothing more than a narrow strip of land along a lake. That strip was called the Toledo Strip, about 13 kilometers wide, located along what is now Ohio's northern border. Small, yes, but in the 1830s it was a strategic prize. Access to Lake Erie, control of the Maumee River, and enormous commercial potential. And so Ohio and Michigan both pointed at it and said, mine. History would later call the dispute the Toledo War, a name that sounds grand but in reality describes one of the strangest wars in American history. There were no cannons, no formal battles, but there was plenty of everything else. Jail threats, armed militias, angry governors, and egos that refused to back down. The conflict began with a bad map. When Ohio became a state in 1803, its northern border was defined as a straight line drawn from the southern tip of Lake Michigan to Lake Erie. The problem was that maps at the time were inaccurate, placing Lake Michigan in the wrong position. Ohio drew its boundary higher, enclosing Toledo. Michigan, then still a territory, relied on a different map and insisted Toledo belonged to it. For years, the issue was largely ignored. But in 1835, when Michigan prepared to apply for statehood, the dispute flared up instantly. Both sides created counties, appointed officials, and passed laws for the same land. Ohio declared it would jail any Michigan official who dared to work in Toledo. Michigan retaliated by outlawing Ohioans from trespassing in the area. No one backed down. In April 1835, tensions escalated when militias were mobilized. About 600 men from Ohio and 1,000 from Michigan gathered near the Maumee River. It sounded serious. In reality, it was almost comical. The two sides stood at a distance, shouting insults and threats, but neither wanted to fire first. The most famous engagement at Phillips Corners involved only a few warning shots fired into the air. No casualties, no heroes. The bloodiest incident of the entire war happened in a tavern. An Ohio man named Two Stickney lightly stabbed a Michigan sheriff with a penknife during a scuffle. That was considered the only blood spilled in the Toledo War. Eventually, as things threatened to become even more absurd, the federal government stepped in. In 1836, President Andrew Jackson proposed a solution. Ohio would keep Toledo. Michigan would be admitted as a state and be compensated with the entire Upper Peninsula. At first, Michigan was furious. Trading a prosperous port city for a cold, forested wilderness sounded like a terrible deal, but history proved ironic. The Upper Peninsula turned out to be rich in timber, iron, and copper, becoming a major economic engine for Michigan. In the end, no one truly lost. Today, Toledo proudly belongs to Ohio. Michigan proudly claims the UP. And whenever Ohio State faces the University of Michigan on the football field, people still joke about the Toledo War. This rivalry started before there was a scoreboard. A war with no battles and no deaths, yet one of the strangest border stories in American history. Once again, Ohio proves that its history doesn't need bloodshed, just enough stubbornness. Fact number 12, the flag that looks like no other. If there's a fast way to tell you're standing in Ohio, sometimes all it takes is looking up at the flagpole. Among dozens of neat rectangular flags of U.S. states, one flag flutters with two pointed tails, looking as if it's lunging forward. It's not a naval flag, not a festival banner. It is the flag of the state of Ohio. Ohio is the only state in the United States that does not use a rectangular flag. Instead, it chose a rare shape. A swallowtail flag, more precisely a burgee, a type of pennant commonly seen on boats. At a glance, it resembles an elongated triangle with a V-shaped notch cut into the tail, creating a constant sense of motion. It doesn't stand still like other flags. It looks like it's going somewhere. The design of the Ohio flag is far from simple. Its background features red, white, and blue elements that echo the U.S. national flag. At the center is a white circle outlined in blue containing a bold red O, both the first letter of Ohio and a visual reference to the Buckeye nut, the state's familiar symbol. Surrounding it are 13 stars representing the original 13 states of the Union, along with 4 additional stars bringing the total to 17, Ohio's order of admission to the United States. Yet no matter how many layers of meaning it holds, what people remember most is its unusual shape. The flag was officially adopted in 1902, designed by artist John Eisenman. He called it the Ohio Burgee, drawing inspiration from maritime flags. It was a bold decision, as no other state had ever broken away from the rectangular standard, and to this day, Ohio remains the only state to have done so. That distinctive shape brings along a few peculiar details. The Ohio flag is harder to manufacture and requires specialized techniques. Its methods of display and folding are also unique. When folded, it must form a triangle, similar to the folding of the U.S. flag. At official events, Ohioans take pride in the fact that their flag stands out at first glance. Walking through Columbus, past government buildings, schools, or highway rest stops, you'll see this swallowtail flag flying. Visitors often ask, what kind of flag is that? And the answer almost always comes with a hint of pride. That's the Ohio flag. Some say the flag reflects the state's character perfectly, not overly flashy, but unwilling to blend in. Ohio doesn't need to be the tallest, the biggest, or the loudest. It just needs to be a little different, enough to make people look twice. But Ohio isn't done yet, because beyond its fondness for being different, the state also holds a statistic that makes the entire nation look up to the sky. An unusually large number of NASA astronauts come from Ohio, so many that people joke it's a factory for people leaving Earth. And that story is truly out of this world. Fact number 13, the birthplace of 25 astronauts. The statistic makes everyone look up and take notice. Around 25 American astronauts were born in Ohio. That number is strikingly high compared to the state's population, less than 4% of the U.S. population, yet responsible for a disproportionately large share of astronauts. And so Ohio earned a half-joking, half-true nickname, the birthplace of astronauts. The list is anything but ordinary. Neil Armstrong, the boy who grew up in Wapakoneta, became the first human to set foot on the moon. John Glenn, born in Cambridge, was the first American to orbit the Earth. Jim Lovell of Apollo 13, Judith Resnick from Akron, and many generations that followed, from military pilots to scientists, physicians, and engineers. It seems that every time NASA selects astronauts, Ohio is somehow represented. Why Ohio? Part of the answer lies in its aviation heritage. The Wright brothers, who laid the foundation for modern aviation, also came from Ohio. From the early 20th century onward, flying was no longer a far-fetched dream for Ohioans, but something achievable through skill and discipline. When the space age began, many young people from Ohio were ready to take the next step, from the sky into orbit. In addition, Ohio has a strong technical education system. Universities like Ohio State University and Case Western Reserve have trained generations of outstanding engineers and scientists. The state is also home to major Air Force bases, which helped cultivate jet pilots, a well-worn path to NASA during the early decades of the space program. Yet even with all the logical explanations, something is still missing, because the number is just a little too perfect not to make people smile. Online, the question, why are there so many astronauts from Ohio, is often met with a tongue-in-cheek answer. Because if you live in Ohio, everyone wants to fly somewhere else. Ohioans usually just laugh, because they understand it as the world's playful acknowledgement of an intriguing truth. This state consistently produces people willing to leave the ground behind. Today, if you visit the Armstrong Air and Space Museum in Wapakoneta, you'll see walls filled with names, not movie stars, but people who truly left Earth. And somewhere in a small Ohio town, perhaps another child is looking up at the sky, thinking, maybe I can too. Fact 14. When a crazy idea becomes an icon. After Ohio repeatedly sends people off the planet, the state suddenly pulls you back down to Earth with a turn that's very ordinary. Not a rocket, not a laboratory, but a picnic basket. With one small catch, this basket is 7 stories tall and sits in the middle of Newark. Along State Route 16 stands a structure that makes nearly every passing driver hit the brakes a second time, just to be sure their eyes aren't playing tricks. Before them rises a gigantic woven basket, complete with 2 massive handles arching across the sky. This is the Big Basket Building, the most famous picnic basket-shaped building in America, and quite possibly the strangest. Its size alone forces the imagination to slow down. Nearly 60 meters long, over 40 meters wide, and about 30 meters tall, roughly equivalent to a 7-story office building. If the Statue of Liberty were laid on her side, she could fit neatly inside the basket. The 2 aluminum handles on the roof are each nearly 55 meters long, weigh around 75 tons, and are even equipped with heating systems to prevent freezing in winter. A basket with central heating. The building was completed in 1997 at a cost of around $32 million, conceived by Dave Longaberger, founder of the Longaberger Basket Company. His ambition was simple and very Ohio. If the company sold baskets, then its headquarters should be a basket. When he first announced the idea, many employees thought it was just a joke in a meeting. Dave Longaberger was not joking. 2 years later, America gained a new term for this kind of structure: novelty architecture, buildings designed to resemble everyday objects. From the outside, it looks like a basket enlarged 160 times its original size, but inside it functions as a modern office, complete with an atrium, elevators, meeting rooms, and extensive natural lighting. Perhaps the most unusual aspect was the feeling of working there. Employees once said that looking out the windows felt like sitting inside a basket being lifted into the sky. The level of detail is what truly impresses. The color, texture, and raised weave patterns on the exterior were meticulously modeled after real maple wood baskets. This was not a cheap joke, but a giant replica executed with complete seriousness. That's why the building was once dubbed a monument of kitschy achievement, a monument to confident, unapologetic excess. Of course, the story didn't end happily. The Longaberger Company later struggled, relocated its headquarters, and closed in 2018. The basket building sat empty for a time, much to the sadness of Ohioans. Various plans to convert it into a hotel or event center were proposed, but never realized. Still, the building remains preserved and continues to do exactly one thing: make people stop, stare, and smile. Interestingly, the Newark area and its surroundings feature several other giant baskets, from a 9-meter-tall apple basket to outdoor display baskets, as if Ohio has an inexplicable fondness for oversized containers. But the big basket building stands above them all, becoming a quirky yet beloved cultural symbol. And just when you think Ohio has gone far enough with oversized things, the state ends the journey with a 180-degree turn. From a basket the size of a building, we move to a street so short you can cross it in just a few steps. A tiny record, and a very Ohio one. Fact, Suburb 15. The shortest street in the world in Ohio location. The town of Bellefontaine, Ohio, Logan County, home to McKinley Street, locally promoted as the shortest street in the world. The oddity, while many places boast about having long streets, Ohio earns recognition for a record street because it is extremely short. McKinley Street in Bellefontaine measures only 15 feet, about 4.6 meters in length. Yes, you read that right, less than 5 meters. That distance is roughly equivalent to a single sedan or 3 single beds placed end to end. In reality, McKinley Street is merely a tiny connector between 2 other roads, just long enough to accommodate a single roadside house. It is so short that you can walk its entire length in just a few steps, and taking a panoramic photo of the whole street requires standing in one spot and turning the camera. Residents of Bellefontaine proudly call it the shortest street in the world, and the street sign itself includes a special note highlighting this claim. Although Guinness World Records officially lists a shorter street in Scotland, Ebenezer Place, at 2 meters, McKinley Street is still considered the shortest street in the United States and a fun check-in spot for visitors passing through town. Uncovering the story, Bellefontaine was already known for another street record. Court Avenue, located here, was the first concrete paved street in the United States in 1891, which is also a point of pride. Perhaps that fondness for being the first or the most led locals to notice McKinley Street as well, a tiny stretch connecting Main Street and Columbus Avenue right in the town center. McKinley Street has only one official address on it, a single corner house. Technically, it looks more like an alley, but the city council long ago gave it the name McKinley, possibly in honor of President William McKinley, or simply following local naming conventions, and that made it an official street. The 15-foot length is measured from curb to curb between the 2 intersecting streets. The people of Bellefontaine know exactly how to turn this small detail into a source of fun. They often tell visitors, "Our town has the shortest street in the world. You'll be done walking it in just a few steps." Many curious travelers stop by to take photos next to the McKinley Street sign, which is actually taller than the street itself. Quite a few people can stretch out their arms and nearly span the entire length of the street, striking poses that are as amusing as they are memorable. And that is the perfect way to close this strange journey through Ohio, a state that can both possess massive structures dug entirely by hand and cherish a street so short you barely have time to get tired walking it. In Ohio, size has never determined how interesting something can be. From a river that once caught fire to a street only a few steps long, Ohio has made one thing very clear. The strange doesn't have to be big. It just has to be different enough to make you stop and smile.